I was never supposed to be just another employee. That's what my father used to say when he convinced me to join the family business right after college. One day, this will all be yours, he'd repeat, like some overused mantra, as if that promise alone could compensate for the endless unpaid overtime, the lack of benefits, and the sheer exploitation disguised as commitment to the family legacy. Well, for nearly 10 years, I gave everything to that company: marketing strategies, client expansions, sleepless nights solving problems my brothers never had to touch. And yet, I was still treated like an overpaid assistant, while they got promotions, bonuses, and a seat at the decision-making table. The final straw came on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just wrapped up a major deal that brought in more revenue than the company had seen in years. My father barely acknowledged it. Instead, he called me into his office to remind me that my loyalty should be stronger than my need for validation. That's when I saw it, the email that would change everything. A headhunter had reached out, offering me a position at a competing firm with triple the salary, full benefits, and a leadership role. For the first time in a decade, I realized I didn't have to stay. I didn't owe them anything. I stared at the email for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. It felt surreal, like someone had finally handed me a key to the prison I hadn't even realized I was locked in. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I closed my laptop and walked out of my father's office, feeling something unfamiliar but intoxicating. Power. For years, I had accepted every dismissal, every time my ideas were stolen, every meeting I was excluded from. But this was my moment, and I was going to make it count. That night, I lay awake, planning my exit. A normal resignation wouldn't do, not after everything they had put me through. I wanted them to feel it, to understand exactly what they were losing. So I played along for another week, acting as if nothing had changed, letting them think I was still their obedient workhorse. Meanwhile, I finalized negotiations with the new company, ensuring every detail was ironclad. The salary was locked in, the contract signed. Once I knew there was no turning back, I set the stage for my grand finale. The morning of my resignation, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I wanted to soak it all in, this place that had drained me for a decade, that had taken my ideas, my time, my sanity, and given me nothing in return. I walked past my brother's offices where they sat like royalty, feet propped up on desks, discussing golf trips and investment properties they'd acquired with bonuses I never received. Past the break room, where employees whispered about how lucky I was to be in the family business, not realizing I was the lowest paid person in the building. Past my father's office, where the door was always open for them, but never for me. And then, finally, to my desk, the same desk I had started at 10 years ago, because despite all my work, all my success, I was never allowed to move up. I printed my resignation letter, 5 crisp copies, one for each of them. I didn't just quit. I crafted an exit that would be impossible to ignore. The letter detailed every major deal I had closed, every client I had brought in, every project I had salvaged when they had failed. I included exact numbers, percentages, and the undeniable truth. I had been the backbone of this company, and they had treated me like an afterthought. But the real masterpiece? The final paragraph. By the time you read this, I wrote, I will have accepted a leadership position at competitor's name, where I will finally be compensated for the value I bring. I wish you all the best in figuring out how to replace me. I suspect it won't be easy. I walked into the Monday morning meeting like it was any other day. My father sat at the head of the table, flanked by my brothers, their faces filled with the usual smug indifference. The department heads trickled in, a few nodding at me as they took their seats. I waited until everyone had settled before standing up. Before we start, I said, my voice calm, controlled, I have something important to share. I reached into my folder, pulled out the resignation letters, and placed one in front of my father, one in front of each brother, and then, for good measure, handed a copy to the CFO, whose eyes flickered with interest. For a second, there was silence. Then my father scoffed. What is this? He asked, barely glancing at the letter. One of my brothers laughed under his breath, already assuming this was some kind of joke. I crossed my arms, tilting my head slightly. It's my resignation, I said, effective immediately. That got their attention. My father finally looked down at the paper, his expression shifting as he read the details. My accomplishments, my contributions, laid out in a way he had never acknowledged before. And then the final blow. My new position, at their biggest competitor, leading a team that would directly challenge everything they had built. The room went dead silent. I could see it sinking in, the realization that I wasn't bluffing. My father's fingers tightened around the paper, his jaw clenching so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. My eldest brother, the golden boy, looked at me like I had just slapped him across the face. "You're leaving? Just like that?" he scoffed, trying to sound amused, but there was an edge to his voice. "After everything Dad's done for you?" I let out a sharp laugh, shaking my head. "Everything he's done for me?" I repeated, savoring the moment. "You mean the years of underpayment? The broken promises? The way I was treated like a disposable intern while you two got raises for showing up late and leaving early?" I turned to my father, whose face was turning an alarming shade of red. "You always said this company would be mine someday. But let's be honest, that was never going to happen. And now, it doesn't matter, because I don't need it. I got a better offer. One where my work is valued, where I don't have to fight for a fraction of what you hand out to them without question." I gestured toward my brothers, who were now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. My father slammed the letter onto the table, his nostrils flaring. "You're being emotional," he barked, like he always did when he wanted to shut me down. "You're making a mistake. You think some outsider company is going to treat you better than your own family?" I leaned forward, resting my palms on the polished wood of the conference table, meeting his glare with a steady, unwavering gaze. "You mean the way my own family has treated me? You're right. I do think they'll treat me better. They already are." I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen, and turned it toward him. "Here's my signing bonus. Wired this morning." A number large enough to make my brother's jaws tighten flashed on the screen. "And here's my new salary." My father's mouth opened slightly, like he was about to say something, but nothing came out. "And guess what?" I smiled, letting the silence drag for just a moment. "They offered me more, but I negotiated for even better terms, because I know my worth. Something you never did." The CFO, who had been quiet until now, let out a low whistle. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, clearly impressed. My father shot him a sharp glare, but the damage was done. People in the room were paying attention. Some were trying to mask their reactions, but I could see it. The realization settling in. They had all underestimated me. And now, they were losing me for good. My father's face was a mess of emotions. Anger, disbelief, maybe even a hint of panic. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me. "You think you're irreplaceable?" he snapped, trying to regain control. "This company will be just fine without you." I shrugged, unfazed. "Maybe," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "But let's see how you handle the fallout." I turned to the CFO, who was still holding my resignation letter, rereading it with an almost amused expression. "Since I won't be here anymore, I figured I should wrap up a few things. So I personally reached out to every major client I brought in over the years." I paused, watching my father's expression shift. "And, well, turns out they weren't as loyal to the company as you thought. They were loyal to me." A ripple of tension spread across the room. My brothers exchanged nervous glances, the weight of what I was saying finally clicking into place. "You didn't," my eldest brother muttered, his voice low, almost pleading. I smiled. "Oh, I did. And most of them? They'll be moving their contracts to my new company. Some already signed the paperwork." I tapped my phone again. "Want to see the confirmations?" The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. My father's face drained of color, his hand gripping the arm of his chair so tightly I thought the leather might tear. My eldest brother looked like he might throw up. The younger one, always the least competent, just blinked, trying to process what was happening. It was the first time I had ever seen them speechless, and I was going to savor every second of it. "You're bluffing," my father finally said, but his voice lacked its usual authority. I tilted my head. "Am I?" I gestured toward the CFO. "Feel free to confirm it with the clients yourself. I'd start with Mercer & Co. They signed their transfer yesterday." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "And, oh, the Jackson account? Gone. The Varela contract? Also gone. Should I keep going, or do you get the picture?" The CFO hesitated for just a moment before pulling out his phone, likely already checking the damage. My father shot him a warning look, but even he knew better than to ignore a potential financial disaster. My eldest brother leaned forward, his voice low and desperate. "We can fix this," he said, and for the first time, I heard something in his tone I had never heard before. Fear. "You don't have to do this." I laughed, and it wasn't forced. It was genuine, from deep in my chest. After years of being dismissed, underpaid, and overlooked, I was finally watching them scramble. "Oh, I do have to do this," I said, shaking my head. "You just don't like that I finally have the power." I stood up, smoothing my blazer, the one I had worn intentionally today because I knew it made me look like I belonged at the head of the table, not buried under it. "You had 10 years to fix this. 10 years to treat me like more than just free labor. Now, you can deal with the consequences." My father exhaled sharply through his nose, nostrils flaring again. "You're making a mistake," he repeated, like a broken record. "You think they respect you out there? You're just another employee to them. You'll come crawling back once you realize that." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to twist the knife. "I'd rather be just another employee at a place where I'm paid what I'm worth than be your daughter in a place where I never mattered." I watched the words land, the way his fingers twitched like he wanted to slam his fist on the table, but knew it wouldn't change a damn thing. I turned toward the door. "Oh, and one more thing," I said over my shoulder. "Since I'm no longer an employee, I assume my severance is whatever you'd give someone in my position." I grinned. "Which, knowing you, is nothing. Good thing I don't need it." And with that, I walked out, leaving them drowning in the mess they had created. As I walked out of that conference room, I expected to feel relief, maybe even triumph. But what I felt, more than anything, was weightless, like I had finally cut the strings that had been pulling me down for years. The office was eerily quiet as I made my way back to my desk one last time. People stared, whispering, already sensing that something seismic had just happened. I didn't acknowledge them. I had one last thing to do. I gathered my personal belongings, not that I had much. Just a few framed photos, a couple of notebooks, and the coffee mug I had bought years ago when I still believed I had a future here. I held it for a second, debating whether to take it or leave it behind. Then, with a small, satisfied smile, I placed it dead center on my now empty desk and turned it so anyone who walked by could read it. In bold letters it said, "Know your worth." As I stepped into the elevator, I checked my phone. A flood of emails from my new company welcoming me, a couple of texts from ex-clients congratulating me on my move, and one unread message from an unknown number. I clicked on it. "You won't get far without us. You'll regret this." No name, but I didn't need one. I knew exactly who sent it. I smiled, shaking my head as I tucked my phone into my bag. They still didn't get it. I wasn't looking back. I wasn't regretting a damn thing. I had already won.